international politics, nations rarely fight merely for land. Beneath the headlines, beyond the speeches, and underneath the moral narratives presented to the world, lies a deeper reality: the struggle for strategic space. Throughout history, empires, kingdoms, and modern nation-states have sought not only territory but geography that grants security, influence, economic survival, and military advantage. From the plains of Eastern Europe to the waters of the South China Sea, the logic remains remarkably consistent. Geography continues to shape power.
Before we move forward, please like, subscribe, and share Strategic Vanguard, and be up to date with the latest news and happenings from the world of defense and strategic affairs. Tune into our video channels in Rumble and YouTube. And if you want to hear the audio version, please tune into Strategic Vanguard DeepDive in Spotify.
The modern world often presents itself as technologically advanced and interconnected, as though geography has somehow become irrelevant in the age of satellites, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and long-range missiles. Yet the opposite appears true. In many ways, geography has become even more important because modern economies and military systems are deeply dependent on vulnerable supply chains, maritime trade routes, energy corridors, and strategic chokepoints. Nations today may speak the language of diplomacy, but they still think in terms of maps. The conflict in Ukraine is not merely a war between two neighboring states. It represents a deeper contest over strategic depth and spheres of influence. For centuries, Russia viewed the flat plains of Eastern Europe as both a gateway and a vulnerability. Napoleon crossed those plains. Hitler crossed those plains. Foreign armies reached deep into Russian territory through geography that offered little natural protection. As a result, Russian strategic culture evolved around the idea of buffer zones, territories that separate the Russian heartland from hostile powers. Whether one agrees with Russian actions or not, the geopolitical logic behind Moscow's fears cannot be understood without understanding geography. Similarly, China's actions in the Indo-Pacific cannot be viewed solely through the lens of economics or nationalism. Beijing's strategic behavior is heavily shaped by maritime geography. China's industrial economy depends on sea lanes that pass through narrow choke points, such as the Malacca Strait. Much of its imported energy travels through waters dominated by rival naval powers. The first island chain, stretching from Japan through Taiwan to the Philippines, acts like a strategic barrier limiting China's access to the wider Pacific Ocean. From Beijing's perspective, this geography creates vulnerability and potential encirclement. The United States, meanwhile, approaches global strategy from the perspective of a maritime superpower. Protected by two vast oceans and supported by powerful naval capabilities, America's strength historically came from controlling sea lanes, alliances, and trade routes. Washington's alliances in Europe and Asia are not simply political partnerships. They are part of a larger strategic architecture designed to maintain influence across critical regions and prevent the emergence of hostile continental powers capable of dominating Eurasia. This ancient competition between land powers and maritime powers has shaped world history for centuries. The British Empire feared the rise of continental powers capable of challenging its maritime dominance. Imperial Germany sought naval expansion to challenge Britain. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union attempted to break out of geographical constraints, while the United States built alliances around the Soviet periphery. Today, similar patterns are re-emerging across the Indo-Pacific. At the heart of this competition lies a timeless reality. Geography determines opportunity, vulnerability, and ambition. Nations with secure geography often project power outward. Nations trapped within vulnerable geography seek strategic depth. Nations surrounded by rivals seek buffer zones. Nations dependent on maritime trade seek naval dominance. The map quietly shapes the destiny of states. The concept of strategic encirclement emerges directly from this reality. Great powers fear being surrounded not merely because of military threats, but because encirclement limits freedom of action. A state that feels strategically constrained begins to behave defensively, aggressively, or both. History repeatedly demonstrates that major powers react strongly when they perceive hostile coalitions forming near their borders or strategic zones. For Russia, NATO expansion toward Eastern Europe created the perception of shrinking strategic depth. For China, the growing cooperation between the United States, Japan, Australia, India, and regional partners creates fears of maritime containment. For Iran, the presence of hostile forces around the Persian Gulf shapes its security calculations. Even India, traditionally non-aligned, increasingly thinks in terms of securing strategic space across the Indian Ocean as Chinese influence expands in surrounding regions. In many ways, modern geopolitics resembles a sophisticated chessboard, where geography remains the board itself. Technology changes the speed of conflict, but geography still determines where power can be projected and sustained. Aircraft carriers require ports and logistics, trade requires secure sea lanes. Energy pipelines require stable corridors. Military alliances require geographical positioning. Geography continues to impose limits even on technologically advanced states. Consider the importance of maritime chokepoints. A handful of narrow waterways connect the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz, the Malacca Strait, the Suez Canal, and the Bab el-Mandeb are not simply commercial routes. They are strategic arteries through which global trade and energy flow. Control or disruption of these choke points can influence global economics and military calculations simultaneously. This is precisely why naval power remains central to great power competition. Sea power is not merely about warships. It is about sustaining trade, protecting supply chains, securing influence, and projecting force far from home territory. Alfred Thayer Mahan, the influential naval strategist, argued that nations controlling maritime commerce and sea lanes would dominate global power structures. More than a century later, his logic still shapes strategic thinking. China's rapid naval modernization reflects this reality. Beijing understands that economic growth without maritime security creates strategic vulnerability. This explains China's investments in aircraft carriers, anti-access missile systems, artificial islands in the South China Sea, and overseas infrastructure projects connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. These are not isolated policies. They form part of a broader effort to secure strategic space and reduce vulnerability. The South China Sea itself illustrates how geography and strategy intersect. To many observers, disputes over reefs and islands may appear insignificant. Yet these waters carry enormous strategic value. Trillions of dollars in trade pass through the region annually. The sea lanes connect East Asian economies to global markets. Military access through these waters influences the balance of power across the Indo-Pacific. For China, dominance in the South China Sea enhances strategic depth. For the United States and regional powers, preventing unilateral control is equally important. Taiwan occupies an especially critical position within this strategic landscape. Geographically, Taiwan sits at the center of the first island chain. Strategically, it acts as both a shield and a gateway. Control over Taiwan would significantly alter the military balance in the Western Pacific. From Beijing's perspective, Taiwan is not merely a political issue. It is deeply connected to maritime access, strategic vulnerability, and national security calculations. India too increasingly recognizes the importance of geography in shaping power. Historically protected by the Himalayas and surrounded by the Indian Ocean, India possessed natural strategic advantages. However, modern geopolitics has introduced new complexities. Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean region, infrastructure projects in neighboring countries, and expanding naval presence across maritime routes have altered India's strategic environment. This is why India has accelerated naval modernization and strengthened partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. The Indian Ocean is not simply a body of water for India. It represents economic lifelines, energy security, and strategic influence. Nearly all major trade routes connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe pass through waters of immense importance to India's future. The Indo-Pacific itself has emerged as the defining geopolitical theater of the 21st century because it combines economic gravity with strategic competition. This region contains critical sea lanes, rising military powers, technological competition, energy flows, and demographic strength. Whoever shapes the Indo-Pacific will influence the future global order. Yet, geopolitical competition is not only about military assets or alliances, it is also psychological. Nations interpret geography emotionally and historically. Strategic memories shape contemporary behavior. Russia remembers invasions from the West. China remembers the century of humiliation and foreign naval dominance along its coast. India remembers colonial maritime control and continental threats. The United States remembers the strategic lessons of global wars and the importance of preventing hostile domination of Eurasia. These historical memories create strategic instincts that persist across generations. Leaders change, governments change, technologies evolve, yet geographical anxieties often remain remarkably constant. The idea of buffer zones further demonstrates this continuity. Throughout history, powerful states sought territories that absorbed threats before they reached the core homeland. The Roman Empire maintained frontier regions. Imperial Russia expanded westward for strategic depth. During the Cold War, Eastern Europe became a buffer between NATO and the Soviet Union. Even today, nations seek influence in neighboring regions partly to prevent hostile encroachment. Critics may argue that such thinking belongs to an older age of imperialism. Yet geopolitical realities continue to shape state behavior, regardless of ideological preferences. International politics operates within a system where survival remains the ultimate priority. States therefore seek favorable geography, strategic access, and reduced vulnerability. Technology changes warfare, but rarely abolishes geography. Hypersonic missiles may reduce warning times, but bases, logistics, and supply chains still matter. Cyber warfare may target digital systems, but undersea cables and data infrastructure follow geographical routes. Space assets may enhance surveillance, but launch facilities and industrial bases remain tied to physical territory. Even economic globalization has reinforced the strategic importance of geography. Nations are interconnected through trade networks that depend on secure transportation corridors. Supply chain disruptions during global crises revealed how vulnerable modern economies are to geographical bottlenecks. Strategic competition today increasingly involves securing economic corridors, ports, semiconductor supply chains, and critical minerals. This explains why infrastructure projects have become geopolitical tools. China's Belt and Road Initiative is not merely an economic project. It expands influence across ports, railways, highways, and logistical corridors. Similarly, competing infrastructure initiatives by the United States, India, Europe, and regional partners reflect attempts to shape strategic geography through economic means. Africa, the Middle East, and the Arctic are also becoming arenas of strategic competition because geography grants them renewed importance. The Arctic offers emerging maritime routes and resource access. The Middle East remains central due to energy chokepoints. Africa connects major maritime routes and contains critical minerals necessary for advanced technologies. The competition for strategic space therefore extends beyond conventional warfare. It includes economics, infrastructure, diplomacy, technology, and information influence. Great powers seek not only military superiority but also positional advantage across interconnected domains. This broader understanding of geopolitics is essential because modern conflicts rarely emerge suddenly. They develop gradually through shifting balances of influence, access, alliances, and perceptions. Strategic competition often begins long before military confrontation occurs. Ports are built, alliances deepen. Naval patrols expand, trade routes shift, infrastructure networks emerge. Over time, geography becomes politically charged. One of the most dangerous moments in international politics occurs when a rising power believes its strategic space is shrinking, while an established power seeks to preserve the existing order. This dynamic frequently generates instability. Rising powers seek revision. Established powers seek containment. Miscalculation becomes possible. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta reflected this pattern in the ancient world. Britain and Germany experienced similar tensions before the First World War. The Cold War represented a global struggle between competing systems and strategic zones. Today, many analysts see echoes of this pattern in the evolving relationship between the United States and China. However, history does not repeat mechanically. Modern nuclear deterrence imposes caution on great powers. Economic interdependence creates mutual vulnerabilities. Information warfare shapes perceptions rapidly. Yet strategic competition continues because states still seek security within an uncertain international system. For smaller nations, this competition creates both opportunities and risks. Countries located near strategic chokepoints or contested regions often become arenas of influence competition. Some attempt balancing strategies. Others align with larger powers for security. Geography can elevate the strategic importance of relatively small states far beyond their size. Singapore, for example, occupies one of the world's most critical maritime locations near the Malacca Strait. Djibouti sits near the Bab el-Mandeb choke point and hosts multiple foreign military bases. Taiwan occupies a pivotal position in the Western Pacific. Ukraine sits at the crossroads between Russia and Europe. Geography transforms these locations into strategic focal points. The Indian Ocean increasingly illustrates how maritime geography shapes future competition. Historically dominated by external naval powers, the region now witnesses growing interest from India, China, the United States, and regional actors. Ports, island territories, undersea infrastructure, and maritime surveillance systems are becoming central to strategic calculations. India's geographic position grants enormous long-term potential. Located at the center of critical Indian Ocean sea lanes, India possesses the ability to influence maritime flows connecting east and west. This geographical advantage could become one of India's greatest strategic strengths if matched by economic and naval capability. At the same time, India faces the challenge of avoiding strategic encirclement itself. Chinese infrastructure and port access agreements across South Asia and the Indian Ocean region generate concerns in New Delhi about long-term balance of power dynamics. This explains India's increasing focus on maritime partnerships, island territories, and naval modernization. The future global order may therefore depend heavily on how strategic geography is managed across the Indo-Pacific. Competition does not automatically lead to conflict. Stable balances of power can emerge if major states recognize mutual vulnerabilities and limits. However, instability increases when nations perceive existential threats to their strategic space. This is why understanding geography is essential for understanding international politics. Behind every alliance lies geography. Behind every naval deployment lies geography. Behind every contested border lies geography. Maps reveal fears, ambitions, and vulnerabilities often more clearly than political speeches. The struggle for strategic space also shapes domestic politics and national identity. Nations often connect territory with historical memory and emotional symbolism. Territorial disputes therefore become politically sensitive because they combine strategic logic with nationalism and identity. Governments cannot easily compromise on issues framed as vital to sovereignty or security. The South China Sea disputes demonstrate this complexity. The region involves strategic maritime routes, resource access, military positioning, and national pride simultaneously. Similarly, Taiwan represents not only a strategic issue but also a deeply symbolic question for China. Ukraine became tied to competing visions of identity, influence, and security in Europe. The modern information environment further intensifies these dynamics. Social media, digital propaganda, and rapid communication amplify nationalist narratives and strategic fears. Public opinion increasingly influences geopolitical decision-making, making compromise more difficult during crises. Yet despite these tensions, geography can also encourage cooperation. Shared sea lanes require stability. Economic interdependence creates incentives to avoid catastrophic conflict. Regional institutions attempt to manage disputes. Diplomacy remains essential because geography cannot be changed, but relationships between states can evolve. Still, the underlying reality persists. Power and geography remain deeply connected. Nations that ignore geography often pay strategic costs. Nations that understand geography can shape regional balances for generations. The rise of the Indo-Pacific as the central strategic theater reflects this enduring truth. The region combines maritime routes, technological competition, demographic power, industrial capacity, and military modernization on an unprecedented scale. It is here that the future relationship between continental power and maritime power may be decided. For India, this transformation presents historic opportunities. India sits at the intersection of continental and maritime Asia. It possesses demographic strength, geographical centrality, and growing strategic relevance. If India successfully combines economic growth with maritime capability and strategic clarity, it could emerge as one of the defining balancing powers of the century. But the larger lesson extends beyond any single country. The modern world may appear driven by ideology, technology, and economics, yet geography quietly shapes them all. Mountains influence invasions, oceans influence trade, chokepoints influence strategy, borders influence fear. Geography does not determine destiny completely, but it establishes the conditions within which nations pursue destiny. Ultimately, great powers fear strategic encirclement, because survival in international politics depends not only on military strength, but on positional advantage. States seek room to maneuver, access to trade, security from threats, and influence over critical regions. Geography provides or denies these advantages. This is why nations compete over islands, ports, sea lanes, mountain passes, and buffer states. This is why alliances form around strategic regions. This is why naval power remains decisive. And this is why the map of the world continues to shape the future of global politics. The weapons may evolve, the technologies may change, the rhetoric may modernize, but beneath the surface, the ancient struggle for strategic space continues. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of geopolitics itself. Civilizations rise, powers expand, alliances shift, and empires fall. But geography endures. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Strategic Vanguard. You can also follow us across platforms. We're on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey, so you never miss our strategic insights. Prefer audio? Tune in on Spotify and Amazon Music, and take Strategic Vanguard with you wherever you go. For deeper, structured analysis, visit strategicvanguard.com/analysis and stay updated with our latest news and views at strategicvanguard.com. Strategic thinking begins with informed perspectives. Stay with Strategic Vanguard.